Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about how to get flexible fast.
Hey guys, we're going to be talking about how to get flexible fast and how to actually improve your flexibility without being frustrated or feeling like it's totally impossible. So, I started gymnastics late. I was 13 and it was pretty rough for me to get in there and get started.
When does someone typically start gymnastics?
So, gymnasts, it's usually like soon as you can move. Like, I have a bunch of preschool classes that I coached during my coaching career, and that's really if you want to go elite or anything, you got to start young. So 13 was very late to the ball game. So when I got started,
That's kind of incredible, though. Like when you think about it, how many other sports? I guess other sports like even like baseball or football, you can start like pee wee stuff, but I mean, you're not even fully developed
yeah,
at 13,
I
like not
mean,
even close.
I mean, most of it's developing the body awareness. So if
Mm.
you don't develop that as a child, you're gonna really struggle. And the second thing is fear. So if you are super afraid of the skills because you're a little bit older, and that's the rational thing to do is get up on a beam and say, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. That's dangerous." But as a kid, you'll do whatever.
Mm.
So it's the same thing with flexibility. Kids are already starting out more flexible, and it's easy for them. So uh, but at 13, you're starting to, have your weird growth spurts and stiffen up. So it took a little more work on my end. So, and I know now I've got that flexibility down. It took me a lot of work, but Matt is now just entering that flexibility trial in his life. So, how's that going for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I've always been athletic. Played numerous sports. So the stretching that I always did was just kind of before a game, at halftime, or in between an inning, just kind of like stretching out a tweak or here and there. But nothing to the point where you're stretching for your sport. It was more just to be able to do your sport. Unlike gymnastics where you literally need flexibility. If you're not able to do a split, you get docked points.
Yeah.
In baseball, if I'm not able to do a split, it's not necessarily that I can't play. Yeah, I mean, I certainly noticed the biggest difference in change is actually in between my junior and senior year of high school, where I really decided, I was going to give up some other sports and make baseball the number one priority. And because I was a pitcher, pitching is really big on mobility and flexibility and being able to repeat the same thing over and over and over again. That's about the only similarity between baseball and gymnastics is the ability to perform something at an elite level over and over again, especially an explosive movement like pitching. And where I really noticed is when I started to incorporate yoga. And then I also started to incorporate some plyometric exercises, not just lifting, but actually going into a full range of motion for some of that stuff. And quite frankly, that season was the only season of my baseball career that I didn't have any pressing injuries. My arm didn't hurt. No leg pain, no back pain, or
Yeah.
no anything.
That is really so there's two types of flexibility in gymnastics. So you'll recognize if you watch um, Simone Biles do some of her back stretching on the floor and push up into, uh, we just call it a bracelet, but she's pushing up in a seal stretch and trying to reach her head back to her toes, and she can barely do it because she's just one ball of muscle. But when she's tumbling, she's doing back handsprings, she's doing these flexible things, and she has absolutely no problem. So it's important to work both, like you said, that active flexibility as well as just static stretching. And that's a really good way to speed up the process of, getting more flexible. You'll also notice it with like leaps. So dancers are pretty much flexible all the time, but there are circumstances, especially with gymnasts, where you don't really need to have, past a 180-degree split. For certain skills, sure, but 180 is where they judge you from. So if you have
180 meaning just you're
totally flat,
just okay, totally
yeah,
flat
no,
on the floor.
nothing beyond there. So you'll see like dancers and rhythmic gymnasts have extended splits, but 180 is perfectly fine. But if you have maybe a 180 split on the ground and it's a struggle, but then you watch the gymnasts do their leaps and they hit that split no problem. And it's because their legs are used to hitting that position because it's a movement you have in a static split. You have gravity kind of helping you out going down, but with a moving split or a leap, you need to work on just the movement through the motion, and that means both strengthening that end range, but also having uh, the initial flexibility that you do with static stretching. So, what have you found the hardest? Just starting with stretching, because I notice that everybody is used to lifting something heavy, or even if you're not an athlete, if you are just working out, you're used to the pain of overworking your muscles. No pain, no gain, whatever. But for whatever reason, stretching, a different kind of discomfort, people are like, I don't like this. I don't want to do it. And I think it's just because it's not something they're used to.
Yeah, if I could give you a specific stretch, something that I am just not very good at
Yeah.
yet, is a straddle stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Just taking your feet, going out to the side, and really stretching the inside part of your legs. Um, that that muscle and my adductors, specifically, like kind of underneath and on the inside of your leg, are the tightest part of my body. But um, I it doesn't affect me when I'm actually doing a movement like a squat, or at least it seemingly doesn't feel that way. Just because you have weight on your back or you have weight going through it, so you just kind of go through that range of motion. But I actually notice it when I go to sit down on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
or I start to do those stretches where I am beyond tight, to the point where it's a dangerous tight.
Yeah.
I actually notice that it's the it's so far past tight that if I were to do an athletic movement or get back on the mound and throw a baseball, it's the tightness where I'd probably get injured.
Yeah. I mean,
There's some sort of there that
it's
there.
going to you're going to both get pinches from straining your muscles past their point of flexibility, and you're also going to get, especially in gymnastics or dance or anything that requires you to go to those uh, ridiculous end ranges of your body's flexibility, that's when you're going to start, hip shifting to one side. That's why it's really important to train both splits. So if, my dominant side is my left side, my left split is definitely better than my right. But for all intents and purposes, I'm training both sides, because if one starts to totally outweigh the other, you're going to start really leaning on that side, and that's when you start to have just imbalances that can relate to injury later on.
Well, you could even see that too, especially in a work environment, just sitting in an office chair. Take a notice next time that you're actually sitting at work. You find yourself in the same way that you kind of you chew on the same side of your mouth, where it's the same thing where you find yourself sitting in the same exact positions in the chair. And while it doesn't seem like a lot, 8 hours in the same position over and over and over again, especially if there's any sort of shift or your back slightly out of line or your legs, longer, a little bit more stretched out than the other. I mean, over the course of days, weeks, months, years,
Yeah, you'll
can
have
really start to affect
some
that.
issues there. So, and that's probably a good place to really start is, why should I care about being flexible if I'm not a dancer or a gymnast or a cheerleader or whatever? So like you were saying, I mean, why did you decide to get more flexible? I mean, with baseball, like you said, it's not that important, but you said with lifting, that's when you started to realize.
Yeah, well, I guess I should preface and flexibility in baseball, they go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when I started baseball at a young age, you don't think about flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're more focused on the skill of the sport and picking that up. Whereas gymnastics, as a part of a skill, you need to
You
be
need to have
flexible.
that.
Like you can't do that without it. Whereas, you know, I can hit a baseball without being flexible. Where I really noticed it, like I said, in between that junior and senior year, where it was the lack of injury, and it was also the ability to get the bat through the zone. When you can kind of torque and you know and swing a baseball bat, the more shifted you can get back, the more rotation you can get back, the more you can come through the zone with.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it's a very similar concept to golf. The more you can kind of rotate, especially at the shoulders and the hips, and really get that club the whole way around, the more speed you can generate and coming through. So I noticed I was hitting the ball more consistently, and I was hitting the ball farther. And then also when I was pitching, it was the same thing. I was able to repeat that same process over again. And then moving sort of after baseball, when I really started, well, I started lifting to get better at baseball. And then when baseball didn't work out, I got into it more for the physique
Mm-hmm.
aspect of things. I just also enjoy lifting heavier weights. And what I noticed was you can lift all you want, but there gets to be a point where that range of motion is very limited. So I actually noticed like a stunt in my lifting and a plateau, because now I was only making stronger the limited range of motion I had. Whereas when I started to really work on my flexibility, especially in my squats and in my legs, I was able to go down a little bit deeper into the squat, and I was able to activate the muscles that needed to be activated sooner. Um, that it just it helped muscle growth in all aspects of my fitness, just by adding a little bit of extra
Yeah.
flexibility
Yeah.
through mobility.
I mean, strength and flexibility go hand in hand, and especially in something that requires as much power as gymnastics does. I mean, we're training for endurance and strength so that we can propel ourselves into the air. But then we also need to have the flexibility for the dance skills, for, you know, just being in a back walkover, hitting a full split. I mean, all of that has to happen hand in hand. If you have, yes, it's easier to become more flexible if you have less muscle mass. That's why you don't see bodybuilders often going around and doing the splits as their warm up in the gym. Uh,
Although some of them can.
some of them can, and
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Is
Mm-hmm.
that's really what you should aspire to, because you'll see dainty little gymnasts doing over splits that would kind of make any passerby like want to scream because they're so far down. But um, having both of those things is really important. So when we're working on our strength, we need to double up on our flexibility so that we don't lose that range of motion. Because as our muscles get tighter as we're using them, that's just, it's just a side effect of soreness and overuse. We need to make sure that we're stretching them out. But then also, if we decide, well, I just want to be flexible, I don't really care about strength, then you end up with the possibility of injury because you're having improved mobility in your joints, but you don't have the supporting muscles around them to, keep them in place. So you'll end up with a lot of ankle and knee injuries, especially in gymnastics. That's everything that I noticed with the smaller girls that weren't necessarily training as much conditioning as they should have been. They often had joint injuries from that extra flexibility that they couldn't control.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I started gymnastics late, which meant I really had to get my head in the game and in order to keep up with everyone else. They'd already been in it for, about 10 years at the time that I joined. And so for me, I quickly figured out a way to improve my flexibility quickly. And I've kind of pushed that over to you because, especially if you've never stretched before, and a lot of people have because it's just something that's lacking in a lot of curriculums, is just general stretching, not just like pull your knee back to your butt before you run, but an actual well-rounded stretching routine.
Well, let's just go on that quick because that's the so the thing that is the toughest, especially like in a gym class or even for a sport, is we only really stretch at the very beginning just to get
Hmm.
warmed up.
And if there was time, we'd do a little stretching at the end.
Right, if there was time. But what I've come to understand, because of Sarah, obviously being a gymnast and she's flexible all the time, is that anytime throughout the course of the day, you don't need to stretch for 15, 20,
No.
25 minutes every single time. So I've just gotten in the habit of, if I get up, if I need to get a drink of water, do a standing toe touch.
Hmm.
Just do little things like that, just to kind of maintain that flexibility. And I noticed that I even I start to get tight over the course of the day. So rather than even just sitting up and kind of moving your back and forth, actually focus on that. Instead of using the same concept as what we did when we were younger
Hmm.
with sports, you just do a quick dynamic stretch before the game, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you got to think about it. Like as a kid, you're running around, you're moving your body in every single way
it's
that's
true too.
possible.
Hmm.
And as an adult, how often are you, reaching overhead other than taking the Christmas decorations out of the attic or putting the dishes away?
Right.
It's not
Or,
a
or I mean, the other thing is too, like as an adult, it's maybe not even that, but then you actually are doing more as an adult because you have
Mhm.
things to do, whereas a kid is just
for fun.
for fun.
Yeah.
Just going out and doing things.
So now, you've got these heavy boxes of Christmas decorations to take out of the attic, and if that's a once a year thing that you're actually lifting heavy overhead, it pretty quickly you're just gonna skip the Christmas
Hmm.
decorations. So a lot of older people have a lot of trouble working overhead, and there's a lot that goes into that, but a lot of it is just we don't practice that movement anymore because we don't need to.
Hmm. Whereas,
So
I mean, you think about like a little kid.
yeah,
He's little. He's low
yeah.
to the ground. So everything that he does has to be,
Up
mama,
overhead,
dad,
reaching up on
over
the monkey
overhead.
bars, anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything is overhead.
So, and that's just one example. But constant movement throughout your day. I mean, if you continue to practice sitting, just sitting on the ground and getting back up again, you're going to be able to do it when you're 90 years old. I mean, if you've done it every day and there's
Hmm.
no, you're keeping yourself in good shape. But but there are some other things you can do as well, other than just static stretching, which it can be boring. You're sitting there, you have to hold it for 30 seconds to feel that improvement. But just as a baseline, start drinking more water. So that's one of those top 5 steps that we have in our fitness transformation article. But just starting with drinking more water is going to not only make you feel better, but it's also going to improve your general performance, which means stretching too.
Yeah, I mean, drinking more water is just do it. It's just really good for you, and your body is the majority of your body is water. I find that it helps you sleep better, gives you more energy throughout the course of the day. I do feel more malleable, more flexible, bit less stiff
Yeah.
on days that I am hydrated. When I'm not hydrated, I feel it. I certainly feel it's just a little bit. It's a little bit tougher to move.
Yeah.
That
Your muscle elasticity, that's where I get. Yeah, start drinking your water. But your muscle elasticity, that's where you start to feel your muscles are tight. So think about like a sponge. So if you've got a sponge that is straight out of the package, brand new, and you try to bend it in half, it's just not gonna work. It's
might
gonna,
even break.
yeah. So, and that's your muscles when they're dehydrated. So if you can think about your body as a sponge, let's hydrate them a little bit. Let's dip that sponge in some water, let it soak, and now you're gonna be able to twist it all around, and the sponge is not gonna care. There's not gonna be any breaking. You're just going to be able to move better, and you're going to feel better too.
That's not to say that just drinking water makes you more flexible.
No, but it's
It,
definitely
it's
step one.
yeah, like I mean, you could do all. you could do all these other things and not see, improvement. If you start to really drink water and just make that a consistent part of your day,
Mm-hmm.
consistent part of your diet, um, not just flexibility becomes easier.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, if we go back to that dry sponge analogy, if you think about when you get cramps, it's the same thing. So it's your muscles stiffening up, and they don't have enough water, enough elasticity to stretch the whole way, and so that they're telling your body, hey, I need something here, that we're really stiffening up. And if you try to do anything like heavy lifting or movement, you're going to really injure yourself. So, your body is an amazing thing. It's not giving you a cramp just to say, screw you, let's,
Mhm.
like, I'm going to give you a cramp. It's telling you there's something wrong. We need to fix it before we injure
And
ourselves.
usually when there's a cramp, it's just too late. What I learned when I was playing baseball is you're hydrating for the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had a big start, or I was on the mound the next day and I really need to be on my A game, hydration starts the day before. And if you apply that concept to then every day, then every single day you're hydrating for the next day, which puts you on a really good course,
Mm-hmm.
because you start to get into that sports event and you're dehydrated, or you start to cramp up. Good luck.
Yeah.
Especially if it's really cold or if it's really hot outside, where those muscles are in constant tension. Um, you can also get it in a work day too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just make it a habit to drink more water, one, your overall mood is going to be better, and then you're just gonna feel better, and then also be able to help with your mobility and flexibility for
And
anything that you do.
yeah, and especially moving forward, as we age too, you want to maintain that mobility and that flexibility. So
It's just
something.
old people just don't drink
Well,
water.
that's the next thing I was gonna say. So our bodies are supposed to be about 70% water. Most people know that. We are made mostly of water, so it makes sense that we should drink it. Um, so kids are pretty pliable. They run around constantly, but we're also making sure that they're drinking water. And kids also don't have that hormonal response to hunger. So as adults, we often confuse thirst with hunger, and we say something's wrong, and we don't know how to interpret it, so we go and have a snack instead of what our bodies really need is a glass of water. But kids are drinking constantly, which is another reason that they are just pliable little things.
It's
Uh,
amazing. Like kids are just unbelievable with some of the positions that they end up landing in, or they fall over and it seemingly they bend in half.
yeah,
Um,
everything's soft.
yeah,
It's
they
soft
just they
joints
just get
that
up.
just kind of
They just get up.
deal with it.
I would be in half. Like I would be broken and on the ground if I landed, like some of the kids I've seen land, especially like at parks and even at the
Yeah,
gym and coaching. It's unbelievable.
but yes, but kids are drinking water. That's a big part of that.
Hmm.
One, they're growing, but two, they're drinking water. Um, and then we don't maintain that proper hydration as we get older, unfortunately. So, at ages 30 to 40, our bodies are only 55% water on average. So it's supposed to be 70, and we're at average at 55. So,
That's a lot of percentages.
yeah. So, and then by 75 to 80, I mean, my grandparents didn't really drink that much water. It's just, and a lot of older people I know, a couple of my relatives and friends work in nursing homes, and they have to, it's like forcing them to drink water. Part of it is, I think it was learned that if you drink too much water, it's bad for you.
Which
It,
it is,
but it
but
takes a lot
like
of water.
gallons
Yeah.
upon gallons,
Yes.
like a lot of gallons of water,
Yes.
not just even 2 or 3
You really
gallons.
couldn't do it
You, it,
accidentally.
yeah, it's tough.
So, so just drink water. Just you'll better safe than sorry. But by 75 and 80, our bodies are only 50% water. And you know, if your body's supposed to be 70%, that's the difference between like a C and an F. If we're grading it.
20%? Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, uh, and they actually did a study on this, and they put younger people in a room and had water out for them, and they monitored how much they drank. And then they did the same thing with older people, and then they saw how much they drank, but then they also flavored the water later on and saw if that made a difference. And for the younger group, it did. They drank more water when it was flavored, because I think some of that, like I said, goes along with we're not sure if we're hungry or we're thirsty. So flavored water is a really good way to trick your mind into drinking more water, because it's in the middle of that. But then for older people, it didn't make a difference if the water was flavored or not. They still didn't drink any more water. So, a good way to get started in that is to remind yourself that drinking water is a good thing. And whether that means flavoring your water or just having a labeled water bottle, it's going to help you maintain that flexibility over your lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into these things, but just notice how kids do not get hurt as much as adults. Adults are constantly tweaking something, especially older patients. I would say 60s, 70s or older. A simple fall or just walking to the car it can be an issue. Because if they go down and they fall, there's no mobility, there's no flexibility, and a lot of that can be attributed to simply drinking water.
Yeah.
If you're just drinking a lot more water, you're just like that sponge where you're just a lot more flexible, mobile overall to be able to do
So when you
different
are
things.
put in awkward positions, it's not that big of a deal.
Exactly.
So the other thing that we can do, so our second example for getting more flexible, is using full range of motion exercises. So it doesn't mean just sitting on the floor and doing static stretching. So when you're doing your regular workouts, make sure that you're including exercises that help you deepen your range of motion. So whether that means very deep squats or adding burpees, so you're getting up and down off the floor, or you're doing side squats, which stretch out your hips. You can do all of these things and still maintain your strength, but it also helps you strengthen that end range of the motion, which is, like I said, about dancers getting hurt or gymnasts getting hurt when they're not training that end range of the motion. They're just able to get into it. You need to be able to support yourself in it as well.
Yeah, let's put it this way. The majority of people that go to the gym, the average human being, uh, should not be worrying about half reps or quarter reps just in order to lift the weight off the bar. There can certainly there are studies that show that can help aesthetically, or incorporate more of a lifting point from a certain range of motion that you're struggling in.
But you can't have that aesthetics without the baseline lifting.
Well, exactly, and that was going to be beyond my point is that if you don't have that full range of motion, you can always train that quarter rep or that half rep, and you can get really strong in that range of motion. But then once you lose the entire range of motion, progressing on from there, if you've only ever done half reps or quarter reps and you haven't taken anything through the full range of motion, and I don't even just mean bench press, I mean something like a dip. So that dip allows you to go the whole way through your shoulder, your chest range of motion, and then press the whole way up through that. As opposed to the bench press, I mean, you could stop it at any point. But ultimately, if you aren't taking your body the whole way through the range of motion, which I think is the way most people should train, you're completely missing out on a lot of strength gains and a lot of aesthetic gains if that's what you're into moving down the road. And then also just not even to mention just living. You live in a full range of motion.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is we kind of stop where it's uncomfortable, which is not, or stop before where you feel uncomfortable, and that makes us kind of lose out on just not only strengthening that end range, but also deepening the end range into something that we're more comfortable with. So I like I said, I started gymnastics late. I was not born with splits. That's not something that that was just given to me. That was something I really needed to work on. It took some time. So what I needed to do was not just push myself into a split the first time so that I could have it next day. That one, I was so far away from that would have just torn almost everything in my legs. Um, what I needed to do was ease into it and practice deepening that range into that split and being more comfortable as I got lower. So you can do the same thing with working out. So, we have, you'll often see in our programming when I'm demonstrating that, I'll say, hey, you don't have to go quite as far. Sarah's mobility is a little bit more, and that's solely because I've worked on it. But as you get more comfortable with a squat at, a certain degree, let's say you're at 90 degrees with your squat, that's pretty good. Now go a little bit farther, just enough that you're not injuring yourself, but you're feeling an improvement and you're saying, okay, this is a little uncomfortable right now. But the next couple times that you do it, your body's going to say, oh, okay, I need to be able to get down this far. So I'm going to loosen up a little bit so that I can.
Yeah, once again, just like what Sarah said, with you wouldn't do a split to full depth the very first time you do that. If you can squat to 90 degrees with weight, we wouldn't necessarily recommend going farther than 90 degrees or as far as you possibly can with weight. Lessen the weight a little bit. I also am a huge advocate for not necessarily, like, definitely lowering the weight, but adding weight, especially to a squat, to certain exercises, because that can take you past that stretching point. It's an active stretch, or a passive, I should say, where you can load up the bar, and then rather than forcing yourself into that low squat position.
Yeah, you have a little bit of extra gravity working on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept of, someone, you go down to a low squat and someone presses on your shoulder to force you down a little bit more.
And you can do that. That's a really good way, especially if you're struggling to even get to if you're in a straddle position and you are sitting up, you can't really stretch very far at all to even feel a stretch in your muscles. Have someone lightly push you down, lightly, emphasis on lightly. In the gymnastics world, it's very common to see coaches just push girls all the way down to the ground, or even sit on their backs and try to make them get into a deeper split. And it's just not the way to do it. Your body is not meant to be forced into flexibility positions. It's a slow process, and this whole thing is about making it faster. But again, you cannot force yourself into it. It's going to be a lot quicker in the long run to ease yourself into deeper positions, and then fight for it on your first try and injure yourself and then have to get over the injury and start from square one.
We can guarantee that you're going to feel better after your first stretching session. Promise you that. Where getting flexible fast comes in is fast is not 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Fast means consistency. And if you stretch consistently over the course of even just a week, you are going to be more flexible on Friday than you were on Monday. That's a fact. And especially if you keep it consistent. Now, to get to Sarah's level of flexibility from me, I mean, you're talking probably months of consistent stretching. But in the grand scheme of things, months is a lot different than years or decades. You're talking about a pretty quick amount of time.
Just like anyone can get started in running, anyone can stretch. Everyone knows at the basics of running, they can get up and go. But
stretching is probably it's easier to get into.
Easier.
You can always do it.
Yeah.
Always.
The thing is that people don't necessarily know what stretches to do or what they're for. I had a friend come to me and say, I have this really bad back pain. Her job required her to stand on her feet for the majority of the day. And I said, okay, well, have you tried stretching? I gave her like, a little stretching routine with 10 stretches on it. She said she got back to me 2 weeks later and said, I've been doing this every single day and the pain is gone, but I have never stretched before in my life. And to me, where, stretching is you have to do it, or
Going back to that baseball gymnastics
yeah,
situation,
if you don't stretch in gymnastics, like you're not doing anything that day.
yeah.
So to me, that was like, what? Like people don't stretch, and that's, it's not their fault. It was required for me by my sport, but for anyone else,
Well, you even look at it in our modern society, everything is meant to be comfortable. Everything is meant to be exactly where we need it. Even, up into just like sitting, sitting in a chair and having not, your laptop isn't on the floor, it's on your lap or
Right.
it's on a desk. Everything is directly in front of you, so you don't have to move. Well, at least I like using the term ground game. But I know that that's kind of, making its rounds and being a popular thing amongst a lot of, physical therapists and people in the gym world. And it just simply means is kind of make yourself uncomfortable by just sitting on the floor, putting your laptop on the floor, putting yourself in a position where it's not necessarily comfortable.
Well,
because that's what our ancestors did.
Yeah, the great thing about being on the floor is, so in a chair you can kind of sit there you can sit there for 8 hours and feel moderately comfortable. But when you're on the floor, you'll quickly realize, even me, like if I am sitting in a straddle, and in college I would do my homework just sitting in legs out to the side, leaning forward into a straddle and doing my homework.
Blows my mind.
And that was comfortable, for about a minute, 2 minutes, and then I'd have to adjust, and then maybe I was, just on my stomach and doing it that way, and now I'm stretching my back. And so without even realizing it, your body is moving itself through these different positions that are helping to stretch it, but it's also helping to keep you comfortable and not overdo it. So if you're not quite sure how to stretch, that's a really good starting point, is to just get your body uncomfortable and then figure out what it does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just sitting on the floor, doing little things, like I said, of just kind of, touching your toes throughout the course of the day and just kind of holding it there, feeling out where you're stiff, where you're tight, and try stretching it first as opposed to just popping an Advil and going back to work. Try stretching, try feeling things out first, and then you can kind of go from there and maybe incorporate some foam rolling or my absolute favorite thing to do. And we're blessed. We have, we were able to have a squat rack, but loading up the bar with a relatively light weight, 135 pounds, which is just a 45-pound plate on each side, and just putting it on my back and going into a deep squat. By doing that, especially before a long road trip or even after a long road trip, it just allows me to sink down in as deep as I possibly can, and just kind of hang out in that position until I can then go a little bit farther. Just that, being able to move a little bit more makes it that much better.
Yeah. Speaking of just finding that flexibility and mobility for certain movements in the gym, something that you've struggled with but you're working on is pistol squats. So how do you feel about pistol squats?
Well, the pistol squat,
because I love them.
Yeah. Here's the reality. Much like gymnastics, it will be very difficult to do a pistol squat pain-free without the mobility. It cannot be done. A mobile lower half is what makes the pistol squat, I wouldn't say easy, but at least it makes the pistol squat doable.
Yes.
And no, I love pistol squats. It's something that I'm actively working on. There are certainly ways that you can introduce a pistol squat to someone.
And that's what I was trying to get at is when we were talking about don't load up the bar and just go into a deeper squat than you've ever done with a weight that you've never done. That's not the way to get into it. But for same thing for pistol squats. Don't just try to get down to the ground for your first try. There are a lot of different ways that you can ease yourself into it. And my favorite way to teach it is standing up on, whether it's a yoga block or just the bottom step of your staircase, and squatting down with that one leg and letting your other foot go in front of you, just touching your heel and then coming back up. And the higher you are, the more difficult it's going to be because you're going to have to go deeper into that squat. But and that's a really good way to get you started on, okay, my body needs to move this way. What do I need to adjust and strengthen and make more flexible so that I can do it?
Yeah, just taking any movement that you can, and trying to go through the end range of that motion with good form.
Yeah.
That's another big thing. I'm not going into a full deep squat with a rounded back. Still keeping my back tight
Yes.
and my core engaged. It just allows my hips to open, and allows to get my knees tracking over my middle toes, as opposed to just stopping.
Because when you land in an awkward position, again, you want to be able to adjust into that correct position. Sometimes when we just trip and we fall and we land in a deeper squat than our bodies have ever done, that's when you start to pull muscles and whatever. So keeping up with that strength and the flexibility is a major thing. The thing I used to tell the girls was they would, especially right after the Olympics, they would all go home and watch, and I'd say, okay, would you guys be able to tumble that high as these gymnasts did, and then land and not hurt yourself? And they were like, no way, that's way too high. They're at the top of the ceiling of our gym. And I said, why can they land it safely and we can't? And they said, because they're stronger. So it's that kind of thinking where they've definitely ended in awkward positions for some of those skills. But for the amount of skills that they're doing, injury is, not nearly as prevalent as if, even I have been retired. So if I went in there and tried it, I would not be able to land perfectly every time, and I would definitely injure myself. So part of it is training for your real life circumstances. So if you're going to fall over into a strange position, you need to be prepared for it. So if you do things like hiking or biking or anything like that, my brother just recently bought a brand new bike and toppled headfirst over the handlebars on his first try, and he just kind of ended up his hands just hit the ground, and he rolled. And he had a helmet on, so he was pretty much okay there. But the problem was, if he was in less shape, he wasn't as flexible as he would have definitely hurt himself more than he did. So preparing yourself for the worst can be actually a good thing if you're thinking about the way that your body moves and the way that it should be able to move, worst case scenario. The other thing that we can do to increase our full range of motion, like we said about using exercises that increase our full range of motion, we can also do some dynamic stretching, which we said at the beginning of not just static stretching. Static stretching is sitting in a straddle position or a pike and just holding it there for 30 seconds. Dynamic stretching is that includes more like walking lunges, high knees, trunk twists, things that you are moving during. It's getting your body warmed up, but it's also pushing it through those ranges of motion that you will come across during regular sports or just even running. So holding that position for half a second and then moving forward. So if we're doing lunges, you go into a deep lunge, come back up. Go into a deep lunge, come back up. That would be considered a dynamic stretch rather than holding a deep lunge and really stretching out that hip flexor for 30 seconds. Both of those things combined, the static and dynamic stretching, you're going to see major improvement there. So Some exercises that we can do to challenge our depth of movement. Like we said, a pistol squat is a really good exercise, but it's also can be fairly challenging when we first look at it. Just doing a low squat, getting deeper than you are used to, or even a close leg squat. So starting instead of feet shoulder width apart, put them as close together as you can while still maintaining your feet forward, and then track while tracking your knees over your toes, not letting them come in, go down into a squat. The first times you do this, you'll recognize, oh, I cannot get nearly as far down in this kind of squat than I can with a regular squat. And that's fine because you're stretching different parts of your muscles that are not used to be moving that way. Another one that I really like is alternating squat circles. So if you put your feet on sliders and start in a close leg squat and then just draw a big circle with your right leg and then a big circle with your left leg, those are really good for stretching out your hips while also working on your balance. So if you're staying really low in that close leg squat and then just rotating outward and rotating outward, you're going to feel a big stretch while also strengthening your hip muscles.
Yeah, the biggest thing with any sort of exercise that you do, and this is what I find myself doing more frequently than anything else, is that you do an exercise to also gain flexibility. It's never just a one motion isolation exercise that doesn't also help me be flexible. My favorite thing to do is just a split squat. One leg forward, one leg back, keeping your hips together. When you go to squat down and you just drop your hips straight down and don't allow them to be crooked or, across. When you go straight down like that, you're putting a huge stretch on your back hip and your hip flexor, and also strengthening that front leg by driving up through the tripod foot in your front leg. So once again, it is technically speaking a compound motion, but it's doing so much more than that because you're also getting that flexibility on the back end of that movement.
Yeah. So, and that goes into our third tip for getting flexible fast is avoiding muscle fatigue. So even though you're supposed to be strengthening that muscle, you want to do your best to avoid muscle fatigue. So what this can do is, so if you've ever had a very heavy leg day, the next day you are stiff, you are sore, you can barely sit on the ground, let alone start stretching. It's going to inhibit your progression forward into being more flexible. So if you think about and that doesn't mean not to work hard, but that means to maybe not go do your exercises until fatigue, until your muscles start to shake and you know that you're going to feel sore the next day.
Well, let's just put it this way. You could do that, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to
If your
be
goal is-
shaking,
yeah.
if you're going to be shaking and fatiguing and putting that much work in the day that you're lifting, you better also put that much effort into your stretching either that night or that next day,
Yeah.
because you will be sore.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
It's just that most people don't want to put in the effort and the time into
Yes.
the flexibility aspect the next day.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta also notice that if you don't want to be sore, you have to stretch. Now, if your goal is flexibility and not just I don't want to be sore, but I want to increase my flexibility, then just don't go to fatigue. Don't do it. Go to where you're still challenging yourself and still stretch afterwards. But now the next day, you're not starting from a super stiff position, because even if you stretch it out, sometimes the next day you're still sore. If you start from a sore position and now you're stretching, you're only getting yourself back to where you started. You're not increasing that flexibility. So let's say that you're doing a straddle stretch and you can reach down all the way to grab your toes, and that's your starting point. That's awesome. And then you do a heavy leg day, and the next day you try it out and you can only reach to your ankle, and you feel a stretch there. Okay, like you're still stretching, but now you're not reaching past your foot and you're not getting to that improvement where you're going to feel more flexible. You're just going to maintain the flexibility you already had.
Find an exercise or something that you can test your flexibility each day. For me, that's the squat rack. I try to load that thing up every single day, just the bar and a little bit of weight, and just go down as deep as I can into a squat. If you do that daily, you can then get yourself a baseline of what you need to work on throughout the course of the day. If you're only squatting when you're squatting, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense, without actually having a baseline or anything that you can work on, it's going to be bad news bears, because not only have you not completely recovered from the previous leg day, your muscles have also not stretched out. They haven't lengthened to the point of where they were prior to doing
Yeah.
that leg day.
You're going to push yourself what you're used to, and your body is not ready for it yet with that recovery. So, another thing that we can do to prevent fatigue rather than just not, stretching afterwards and not working our reps to fatigue is foam rolling. So, foam rolling is a huge, huge help with just regular mobility, um, and also just recovering from those tight muscles. So, if you feel knots in your legs or your back or your shoulders, uh, that's your muscle fascia, which is the connective tissue. It kind of holds your muscles in place. And when that tightens up, it kind of pushes your muscles into positions they don't want to be in and they can't move correctly. You can break those knots up by getting a foam roller and just kind of pushing and sitting on where that knot is.
Yeah, so foam rolling, if you could visualize it, if your hands are interlocked with your fingers, um, stretching is pulling that apart. Foam rolling is going into that specific area and stretching those muscle fibers that are too tight. So you can almost visualize that your fingers are starting to break up when you stretch, but when you do foam rolling, it's going like specifically on your fingers. It's relieving that tension that is holding your fingers together. It's just a more spec-
Mm-hmm.
specific form of stretching, to a point. So if you have a knot in your forearm or a knot in your bicep, sometimes difficult to stretch those areas, but with a foam roller, it's doing the same exact thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
just breaking up muscle fascia.
Yeah. So, and a lot of people, we're never, as much as we're not really taught stretching, we're also really not taught uh, foam rolling. I was never taught foam
Definitely
rolling
not.
in
I didn't
school.
start foam rolling until
Yeah, even as a
until
gymnast,
after baseball.
we
Yeah.
never did foam rolling. And that's some of the stuff that I've tried to implement as a coach because it is so helpful. Just with not only increasing your ability to recover, but also being aware of what the issue is. So as adults, we're often told like, "Oh, my hip hurts." And so we have a couple Advil and we deal with it because pain is just part of being adult, right? But it doesn't have to be. So if we notice that my hip hurts, and then a good way, if you don't have a foam roller handy, you just kind of poke around with your fingers and try to find, oh, there's a knot there. So now what you're going to do is you're going to foam roll and see if that helps. So, not every problem can be solved with foam rolling,
A lot of them can.
but a lot of soreness and stiffness problems can. So if you take nothing from this, foam rolling every single day and stretching, and you don't have to do a completely, A to Z stretch with everything pick 10, 8 to 10 stretches that you just do every morning and every night. You hold each one for 30 seconds and then you're done. That's a really good way to get your body moving and just to avoid being stuck in positions that you do every single day, but avoiding the ones where you're lifting overhead or you're twisting or you're doing something that your job at a desk doesn't require you to do.
Yeah, foam rolling guys cannot take precedent over moving.
Mm-hmm.
Foam rolling aids in movement. So you always want to think about pairing that together. Even stretching to a certain standpoint, like if if you can stretch all you want your hamstrings, but if you're not taking your hamstrings through the full range of motion, like on a walk or a run or in a deep squat, that flexibility eventually not
It
only
can,
just goes away, but it goes away faster and
yeah.
then can force you to get into some injury prone
Yeah. Well, it
positions.
can be detrimental. Like I said, if you're not using the muscles that you need to support being in those positions, you're going to end up with an injury.
So that's what I mean. It's like if you have a tweak or like a hip shift or something
Mm-hmm.
like that in your squat, um, foam rolling alone is not going to help that or prevent that. It's a combination of foam rolling, understand your body, and then also still getting under the bar or doing the
Just
motion
applying
and
that
yeah, and
mobility.
applying it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So our fourth step to getting flexible fast is by stretching correctly. So you can stretch all you want, but if you're only holding that position for 15 seconds, don't be surprised if it doesn't improve immediately. And that's a lot of the things, especially as a coach, getting holding a stretch for 30 seconds, which is how long it takes our muscles to. It's not an arbitrary number. If we're doing when we put so much pressure on our muscles, so let's say we're holding a pike position after 30 seconds, so we're putting tension on those muscles by stretching them out, and our body can recognize that. So when we feel that tension after 30 seconds, our body kind of rings an alarm that says, hey, if we maintain this anymore, we're going to get hurt. This isn't going to work out. So what it does is it signals for those muscles to relax. And that's when we get into a deeper stretch. So if you can picture that, and you'll feel it now that you're aware of it, but if you're in a straddle stretch or a split and you hold it for 30 seconds, at that 30-second mark, you'll feel, if you're breathing correctly and you're relaxing into it, not stiffening up, you will feel your muscles start to relax and you will go deeper into that stretch without really having to do anything.
Mm-hmm. That breathing is another huge aspect of stretching too, and just daily life. Uh, Breathing is obviously you need to do it to survive. But nice deep inhales through your nose, doing some square breathing of holding and then releasing a full breath through your mouth, all while holding a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Breathing means you're controlling a certain movement. It
Yeah.
means you control whatever position you're in. So if you're in a deep squat, especially if you're holding it at the
Just
very
makes you
bottom,
think.
if you're holding it at the very bottom, taking a deep breath in and then exhaling as you're holding
Mm-hmm.
that low squat, it forces your body. That's control.
Yeah.
Anybody can just hold their breath as tight as possible and then perform a squat or do a dip or even just do a push up or whatever it is. But being able to own that specific position, especially deep into a stretch, breathe,
Mm-hmm.
that takes control.
Yes.
That's hard.
So you'll recognize one of my major things that I like to do is handstands. So for a regular handstand, I can kick up no problem and breathe, and it's not anything I even have to think about. But when I kick up to a handstand and I want to do some different poses or try one handed, I'm holding my breath because I just am not used to it. Because I have more natural control in the just standard handstand. So the same thing is the same thing for stretching. So if you're doing a straddle stretch and you're reaching down to one side, breathe in, and then when you breathe out, relax into it, go deeper into that stretch, and your body will understand what you're trying to do. The other thing that we can do while we're stretching is to maintain good positioning. So if we're cheating the stretch, and this is something I have to monitor as a coach, is one, are they holding it long enough? Because, like I said, you're not going to feel any benefit from cheating that. And two, are they holding it in the correct position? So, especially with gymnasts, it's a lot easier to go into a split with your hips turned out to the side because your body is more used to that positioning. But what you actually need to increase that positioning is have your hips squared off, both facing forward. So if you're in, let's say, a pike position and you're reaching down and you're touching your toes, but you're bending your knees, well, now you're not actually getting the full stretch. So you might be able to touch your toes, but you're not fully stretching your hamstrings and your back where it needs to be to actually improve that stretch.
Mm-hmm.
So what's something I always yell at you about during your straddle stretches?
Well,
Well, there's probably a couple things.
yeah. Um,
Well, one's bending your knees. Two,
yeah.
how about your feet?
Yeah, making sure that they're, pointed,
Well,
and
pointed
out.
or flexed,
Yeah.
not kind of just in the middle. That does make a difference. So if your feet are flexed, you're going to feel it more in your calves as well. If they're pointed, that's your natural position. But another thing that you want to focus on, especially in a straddle stretch, is making sure your toes are turned out. So that means pinky toes closer to the floor, not big toes. This isn't just important in a straddle stretch, and especially parents, if your kids are a very popular thing for preschoolers is sitting in a W position where their knees are together, they're on the floor, and their feet are facing out on either side of their hips. And this trains their toes to go inward, and this can be really detrimental for landing and just knee injuries. And for preschoolers like that, all I say is don't sit like that. It's bad for your knees. And they're fine with that. They understand. And it's very easy to correct because they are so pliable at that age. When you start to get even to young grade school kids, they have issues with turning their toes out as well. So it's much easier to fix when they're younger.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that we just want to leave you with is stretch daily. So if you stretch and you have a really good stretch session once a month, it's not going to do you much good to increase that flexibility.
Still better than not stretching at all.
Yes, but
Still better than not stretching at all.
But
So
a
if it
little-
takes one stretch session a month for you to get into stretching daily,
I would rather you do that.
do that.
But
Yeah.
but even just 5 stretches every single day, holding each one for 30 seconds, and that's it, you're going to see improvement very quickly.